All right, so welcome everyone. I've been saying this for like 6 months now, but I'm still excited to be back in person, actually seeing more than squares on a screen. So this is really exciting for me. It's interesting. It's almost as if the organizers knew what the topics were and they put things in order so they actually made sense. And so I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how we're helping customers implement some of the things that Catherine was just talking about that the Turing Institute is doing. And so I'm Seth Dobrin. I'm IBM's Global Chief AI Officer. My job at IBM is, among other things, to define our AI strategy and help IBM and our customers execute against that strategy. And I want to talk a little bit about Pixar. And Pixar is arguably one of the most successful film companies that ever existed. And how do they do this? Well, they actually have a formula. And they've developed this formula over the years, and if you think about all their movies, their formula is pretty consistent. Once upon a time, there was a fish, Marlin, and his son was Nemo. And Marlin warns Nemo about the dangers of the open ocean. But one day, Marlin, like all children, ignores his father. And because of that, Nemo ends up in a fish tank. And because of that, Marlin sets off on a journey to find Nemo, until finally, Marlin finds Nemo and brings him home successfully. Now, this is all well and good. And if you think about where we are with companies today, and kind of go back to the title of the talk, over the last two or 3 years, we've all been managing the unexpected. We just recently had some other unexpected actions happen. And how do we deal with this? And as a result of this, there's been labor disruptions. There's new compliance standards that are coming out. And in the last few months, there's been a tremendous amount of inflation around the world. And in certain parts of the world, inflation's been rising for a number of years. And so, AI is arguably one of the world's greatest inventions, one of the world's greatest technologies that's going to influence humankind. And so, how do we help customers be successful using AI? And how have IBM actually been successful at using AI internally? Well, we've got a formula for success as well. And it starts with defining a good AI strategy that's tied very tightly to a business strategy. So making sure you get actual value in dollars and cents from your AI. It doesn't matter how many models you have, doesn't matter how many APIs you have. If you're not generating new revenue or saving money, no one's going to care. Identifying use case. The strategy really is about use cases. If you're going to talk about value, you're talking about business decisions. How do I use AI to impact business decisions? And then to execute on this, we believe strongly there's only a few things that you really need to focus on. One is understanding the language of business. The other is augmenting human productivity and knowledge through automation. Then delivering trusted outcomes while you're doing those two things, as well as a matter of building AI in and of itself, and then providing access to data anywhere. And if you were to ask anyone, or hopefully if you ask anyone at IBM, but certainly if you were to ask me what our AI strategy is, it's basically what's sitting underneath all these four statements. And if you look at how we're helping our customers do this, and some of the biggest companies around the world, as a result of helping them understand the language of their business through natural language processing and natural language understanding, we have some global customers, and we have a lot in this space around the world. Specifically, if you look at Credit Mutuel down in France, they've reduced processing of everyday or completing of everyday processes by as much as 60%. And that allows their client advisors to really spend time doing value-added things that only humans can do with their customers. If you look at NHS, they've been analyzing thousands of tweets that are linked to content daily about global deforestation. And then if you start thinking about automation, how is AI enabling our customers to automate processes and workflows? KPMG is speeding up processing of contracts and documents by up to 75%. They've processed over 75,000 documents. Skoda is saving 40% of the time handling job applications through HR. Lots of companies are actually doing this. This is actually going to become harder in the future because you're going to need there's a lot of regulation that's going to be impacting this. And then Ford Motor Company is using visual inspection to reduce warranty claims by inspecting wiring harnesses as they're being connected on the production line. If you think about it, one of the biggest impactors of warranty claims for a car company are loose connections. And even humans have trouble identifying loose connections between wiring harnesses, but AI, specifically visual inspection, is really, really good at this and can actually prevent cars from going down the line, prevent warranty repairs because they can actually fix them before the cars are completely assembled. And then looking at trustworthy AI. How do we help customers deliver trustworthy AI? And what Catherine from Turing was just talking about is really important. How do we make sure that there's a common theme and a common understanding of what trustworthy AI is? It's going to be super important over the next few years as the EU AI Act is implemented. But there's also standards bodies that are starting to build standards for specific applications of AI as you move forward. And so if you looked at how we've helped a couple of companies, so one company is one of the largest banks in the world. It's based in the United States. They used literally every tool to build and deploy AI known to humankind, plus some that they've built themselves. And if you've ever led an AI team, you know that telling that team that they have to use a single set of tools is not going to fly. It's a battle not worth fighting that you'll never win. And so helping them provide governance, a governance framework around those capabilities so that as a business leader, and we use this inside IBM as well, I get a complete view of all the AI that's being deployed. If a regulator were to come in, because we're based in New York, and we are hiring people in New York using automated processes, and say, how are you using AI? And can you guarantee that it's bias-free? Can you guarantee it's explainable? We could demonstrate that very clearly. We've helped this bank do that as well. And really we're starting to think about how do we tie that into governance frameworks, such as what's being developed here in the UK with UCAS, what's being developed in New York, some of the regulations that are coming out around the world, and even internal processes and standards. We did this with a retail organization in the US, where they have very strict standards internally about what it takes to deploy AI. How do they surface that in the governance framework without creating a burden on their data science teams? How do they make it transparent? If you look at Highmark Health, we're looking at how do we provide fairness in consumer loans around healthcare, and then even NLB, eliminating data silos and providing trusted data, because we all know underneath trustworthy AI, you have to have trusted data. But there's actually one more piece to our story. So if you think about part of our formula, one more piece for us and for Pixar is both words. And when you think about words, how do they pertain to AI? Well, it's data, right? The words of AI is data. How do we make sure we have good access to data? How do we make sure it's fair and understandable? And we kind of talk about it as if it's not a problem. We're going to create this data catalog. It's going to connect all the data in the company. It's going to guarantee that we're compliant with GDPR. It's going to do all these things. But this is a really, really hard and really, really expensive problem, especially in today's world when most companies are on more than one cloud, when most companies are operating across different jurisdictions with things like data localization and data sovereignty regulations. This is now an even harder problem. And when you think about the expectation versus the reality, right? We expect data to be across maybe 2 clouds. We think we have, data across a few, 100 or so SaaS applications. We think maybe there's 400 or so data sources. But the reality is much, much more complex than that. The reality is, research has shown that we're on more than 8 clouds. So an average company is on 8.6 clouds. Data sits across more than 300 SaaS applications. And there's more than 1,000 data sources in almost every organization. And those clouds doesn't even count different instances of the same cloud that you probably have running in your organization that you can't seamlessly move data between, and that you're probably paying egress costs on every time you move it from one instance of that cloud to another. And so how do you solve this problem? So we've got this concept we think of as data fabric. We think about it as its extension of data mesh, and everyone says, what's data fabric? Here's our definition of data fabric. Data mesh is an architectural explanation of how you connect data. Data mesh is the actual implementation of data fabric is an actual implementation of a data mesh architecture that has an active connection to metadata, so it's constantly fresh, and you can connect your data through virtualization without having to centralize it. But when you do centralize it, or if you are moving data out of a cloud, because you have a single view of it, you only need to remove it once So you can reduce your egress costs from many, many times down to only doing it one time or fewer times. And so through leveraging this data fabric methodology or this data fabric concept, we enable customers to create loyalty, we help customers automate business processes, and we actually are able to innovate for future ideas. And now, when you think about back to what is our strategy for AI, for successful implementation of AI, we need to define a strategy, we need to define and identify use cases, we need to learn and understand the language of business and speak that language. And this is an important part. One factor that separates IBM from, say, Amazon or Google or Facebook when you think about AI is that those are really consumer-facing companies. And consumer AI is very, very different from AI for business. So let me give you an example. So we have a somewhat automated house, and we use Alexa to interact with that house. If when we go to bed, I say, Alexa, good night. Well, I'm out of town this week. My wife says to Alexa, good night. She's either got to say it 4 or 5 times or she has to lower her voice. That's wrong. It's annoying, but she's not really harmed by that. She could get up and turn the lights off by hand if she really wanted to. Now, if I'm in a business and I'm applying for a loan and I get a loan and my wife applies for a loan and we share the same assets and she doesn't get that loan, that's a problem. So it's really important to understand that AI for business is not consumer AI. And there's a lot of things that you may want to do if you're interacting directly with consumers, that's okay. But if it impacts a human's health, wealth, or livelihood, you need to be really, really careful about what you're doing and make sure that this AI can be trusted, that it's fair, that it's explainable, and it preserves their privacy. And that's kind of what the EU AI Act is really focusing on, and that's what we believe regulation in AI should focus on is the health, wealth, and livelihood of humans. And so when you think about automation, AI should help augment human productivity, not necessarily replace it, augment human knowledge, deliver trusted AI outcomes, and then access data anytime, anywhere. When you think about what the language of AI is, it's data. What are the words of AI? So we announced yesterday, and this is actually directly related to the Turing Institute, that we're going to start partnering with an organization called the Responsible AI Institute. And this is to align trusted outcomes to standards bodies in a way, and if you think about it, think about LEED certifications. So LEED certification provides, bronze, silver, gold, platinum certifications of buildings and their eco-friendliness or their impact on the environment. What the Responsible AI Institute is doing is they're creating the same kind of third-party, independent assessment that's accredited or certified by accreditation bodies, such as UCAS, to meet certain requirements for these schemes that are basically helping you to define what trustworthy AI is. So for HR, what does bias mean? What is the threshold you have to hit for bias for it to be free of gender bias, for instance? And please stop saying that AI is free of bias, because what kind of bias are you talking about? You need to talk about specific types of bias. And they have this whole system, and one of the great things about this, and one of the reasons we're excited about it, is because it's a programmatic interface that we're going to integrate into our AI governance framework, so that it's fairly transparent to data scientists, so that they're not burdened with doing some of the mundane things that need to be done in order to provide this kind of governance. And so this is really exciting for us. And if you're interested in hearing more about it, there's a webinar. And please come visit the IBM site right around the corner here. We have a nice room where we have demos on all these topics that I presented here today, plus a few others such as sustainability. So come visit us, and thanks for your time. I appreciate the opportunity. And like I said, I'm really, really excited to be here. Hope you all enjoy the next 2 days. Happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Seth. Just kind of come ready with questions, and we'll see if we can get a microphone to you. So please do stick your hand up if you've got a question, and we'll see if we can get a mic over. I'll just kick off, though, Seth, with you and I, probably more so you than I, spend a lot of time with organizations all over the world. You've kind of given a bit of a recipe here for IBM's approach, but what are some of the challenges that you see most often, and how do you approach those?
Yeah, so I think it depends on where in the AI life cycle you're talking about. I think, if it's a company that's just getting started with AI, it's where do I start? And it's back to, what is your AI strategy? How are you tying it to your business strategy? What are the decisions that you're going to apply data or AI to generate value for your company? And having the right metric system. As I alluded to during the talk, the right metric system is not, I have 500 models. The right metric system is, I'm generating X hundreds of billions of pounds a year of cost savings or new value. Because that's really, we're all in businesses, and that's really what, when it comes down to what do businesses care about, they care about meeting their targets.
Just kind of, sorry, I'm going to steal another question. Just drill in on that for a second. So can you give us an example of what does it look like to connect your business strategy to your AI strategy?
Yeah, so before, I've been with IBM for 5 years. Before I joined IBM, I led the transformation of a Fortune 500 company over the previous 5 years. And during that time, I accidentally developed a methodology that was crude and very rough. Over the last couple of years since I've been at IBM, I had some people on my team that were really honing that into a repeatable, workable methodology. It's based on design thinking, but you get actionable insights that come out of it that actually help you define sprints. So it starts with senior executives. What are the decisions that we think we can get value from? Then goes down to the people that actually know the data and the workflow that's required, because as senior executives, we typically really, really don't know what's going on. And then those the technical workshops then get to help to define sprints. They prioritize them. And then you work with your finance organization to assign a value to those decisions and where you think you can get what type of value you think you can get from AI.
Okay, so a well-honed process for doing that. That's great here. Can pause, see if there's anybody got any questions for Seth. Wave a hand if you do. Great, there's one down here. Thank you.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for the talk. I had a question. So you mentioned IBM in terms of the strategies, looking at the health, wealth, and livelihood, which is great. Does IBM, or have you seen applications of IBM, not just in a business sense, but in working with organizations or kind of for social innovation? Yeah,
so we have a whole AI, we just rebranded. I think it's AI for Social Good Now program that we run. We have a whole startup effort where we're helping startups that are founded by underrepresented groups. It's starting in the US right now, so it's primarily focused on what the US defines as underrepresented, so people from the Black and brown community and women. And then a couple of years ago, we actually started the Watson AI X Prize that we wrapped up last year, where it was all focused on AI for good, and we had companies like Marinus Analytics, which were using Watson technology to help pull people out of human trafficking. We had Zap Malaria, who actually won, who's using visual inspection to help reduce malaria. And Alfred Health, which is a Canadian-based company that was looking at how do they provide better outcomes for people with mental health in terms of getting them the right medication sooner. And so those are just some examples. We did something also through our AI for Good program with the Urban Institute in the US, with Diaper Bank. And so we've got a lot of things going like this. So if you're interested and you're doing good, and you're interested in seeing how IBM can help you with our AI for Good program, you can just Google it, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll connect you with the right people.
Fantastic. Excellent. Fantastic initiatives.
There's one over here.
There's a hand down over here, just in the middle of the front block. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Stephen Mears. I lead the AI and data science capability at the UK Ministry of Defence. So I was really interested in what you were saying about the kind of the kite marks for kind of assurance of AI systems. A reflection I have on that is that the standard of assurance that you require is very dependent on the use case.
Definitely.
So
Absolutely.
an example that's been given to me is when you fly on an aeroplane, do you want to know the flight control system has been tested to a higher standard than the in-flight entertainment system? How do you reconcile that kind of use case-driven standard of assurance with the kind of kite mark approach that you're...
Yeah, so while it's a kite mark of AI assurance, it's a kite mark for a given use case. So for instance, we don't give a kite mark for IBM, we give a kite mark for IBM's HR systems. And in terms of the compliance requirements for HR, the base is fairly standard. So I'm told, I'm not an expert in this space, the people from Responsible AI Institute are here, you can talk to them. But it's like 80% common for hiring as it is for talent management, as it is for anything else that you might think of in HR. Same thing with procurement. Same thing with, actually, when I started talking to them, I'm like, well, we need something for loan origination, but really we need to think out what type of loans. And they said, actually, no. The standard is pretty constant, whether it's a mortgage, for consumer mortgage, for consumer credit, et cetera. And so it's based on specific use cases. And again, we can talk after, I think actually we're talking later. And so I can connect you with them and you can ask these specific questions. One back in the back there.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. This is Lubna Barfa, CEO of Okra AI, a company that provides AI solutions for life sciences. So I'm actually interested from this strategy, how IBM moved from selling Watson as a product to use cases now. So how do you manage the dichotomy around productization and consulting? Are you becoming a consulting company for AI, moving away from Watson, or you're still exploring how to productize within those use cases?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, right? So if you look at some of the announcements that just came out lately, you've seen us selling off a lot of assets or divesting a lot of assets. As a company, we made a decision a number of years ago that we were going to be, from a software perspective, we were going to be a general purpose software company. And so Watson Health was the last of our industry-specific software. And if you look at the announcement, we actually didn't sell Watson Health. We sold the assets that were under Watson Health because we didn't also sell the name, or we divested that. But to your specific question about software versus consulting, so we are a general purpose software or technology company, but we provide industry solutions to our customers through consulting. And so we're doing both in general, the value for us for general purpose AI or software versus industry specific software is industry specific software can only be used in a specific industry, whereas when we build things general purpose, it's across the board. And then specific to Watson, Watson is our brand for AI. We talk about Watson as being the trusted AI for business. And if you ask me what it does, it delivers understanding the language of business. It helps you automate workflows and processes, including the workflow and process of building AI. And it delivers trusted outcomes. So Watson is still a brand. We still have Watson products. Today, anything that's branded Watson is truly AI or truly enables the building of AI. So we've really honed down and refined the message to something that's repeatable across the company.
Fantastic. I'm going to jump in with one if there's no hands waving frantically. IBM, as you just described, you spent a huge amount of effort trying to figure out how do you solve many of the core business processes to kind of get those businesses to work efficiently and get the returns. What's next? So in terms of which problems have you not yet solved, which you're looking at next?
Yeah, so IBM is one of the biggest companies in the world also. So a lot of what we've done over the last few years is when we build software and when we have consulting solutions, IBM is usually customer zero. And so a lot of the innovations, a lot of the things that you see coming out in the marketplace were co-developed by products. And actually for consulting, it's sometimes the other way around. So our Workday practice and our Salesforce practice were built out of IBM implementing Workday and Salesforce. And so there are people that have actually done it. And so we use IBM as customer zero, both for software and consulting. I think the biggest move forward right now are those things I mentioned. And we're really focused on ESG. So how do we get a real handle on our ESG? How do we use AI to help us accelerate our ESG platform? How do we operate or use AI to get more efficient IT systems? So AI ops. How do we build and deploy trustworthy AI? And then if you're a financial services company or a government that's using mainframe, how do you modernize this mainframe environment and move workloads off that shouldn't be on the mainframe, but keep those critical workloads that protect the security of people or protect your money where they need to be, so that customers so their customers can get what they need or their citizens can get what they need. So those are the four things that we're really focused on moving forward. And data fabric and those types of concepts, zero trust security, things like that are all critical to that moving forward.
Fantastic.
And
Thank
then
you.
further out, things like quantum and neurosymbolic.
Undoubtedly.
Those are, yeah.
What I love there, I just picked up on the fact that, because we hear lots of people talking about, I was hearing a conference earlier in the week, the challenge of things like carbon accounting. And that is becoming a core business process, which is causing people a lot of headaches. So hearing that you're trying to solve that within IBM makes me wonder if that might be a service which people
absolutely. And actually, we have a really good demo for how we've solved some of this in IBM. And I think one of the really interesting things is we're trying to, because we are such a broad company in our software portfolio, we're actually looking at things like using our Turbonomic acquisition to get a carbon footprint for your IT systems. Or using our Maximo manufacturing suite to get a carbon footprint for your manufacturing, or Sterling for your supply chain, or Tririga for your buildings, and really kind of connecting that all together through this data fabric so that you get a full view of your carbon accounting that's probably much more robust than what you can get doing it yourself. And we actually caused us to launch a new business. So we have a new business we just launched at our Think conference a couple of weeks ago called creatively IBM Sustainability.
Fantastic. Seth, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah.